Micro Four Thirds? What is it? I'm going to tell you all about it. So this video is, if you're a smarty farty pants knowing all about everything and you don't need to know nothing except to tell me what is, this video is probably not for you. But what this is a little introduction, like a little kindergarten level primer on Micro Four Thirds system and how it compares to other interchangeable systems, camera systems. So that's who it's for if you're trying to make that decision about, I want to get an interchangeable lens system camera, but there's all this information and it's confusing to me and I don't understand the differences between everything. That's who this video is mainly for. Or if you're already involved with the system and you really don't know, maybe this will up your knowledge a little bit. So there's about 4 different standard camera systems that are available now. Interchangeable in the interchangeable lens world. There might be some other specialty things out there I'm not aware of, but there's basically 4. There's Micro Four Thirds, APS-C, full frame, and then medium format. And medium format's sort of the least common. You're going to see that the least frequently. I guess it's not necessarily the most professional, but it's the deepest professional system and also the most expensive to own and operate, and also physically the largest system there is. And the main thing that differentiates all of these different camera systems, at least at the core of them, there's other personality traits that come about because of this, but it's the sensor size in the systems. They all have a different sensor size. And Micro Four Thirds is the smallest of those, and APS-C is between, roughly halfway between full frame and Micro Four Thirds. Media format is huge. It's so big. It's like the size of a planet. It's not that big, but it's significantly larger than full frame. And that nomenclature gets confusing because you hear the word full frame and you think, well, that's the full frame. That's the biggest there is. No, it's not. Medium format is bigger. And full frame itself is a misnomer. Now, what is a sensor? The sensor is the little electronic piece of film. I'm going to say it's the permanent piece of electronic film, though everything is susceptible to breakage or wear and tear over time. But it's the permanent piece of digital film that's inside the camera. And maybe we can see inside here. Is our lighting good enough? Let's cheat. Ooh, let's cheat. But there's a little black, the shininess. That's the sensor. That's the little digital piece of film inside of here. Now, full frame is called full frame because it's closest in size. It's roughly the size of an old 35 millimeter piece of film from a film camera. And 35 millimeter pretty much became the standard of interchangeable lens cameras in the film era, which apparently we're entering the film era again, but that is never going to be one of my topics. And again, APS-C, another step below, and the Micro Four Thirds sensor, the little digital piece of film's about half the size of a full frame sensor. What happens with that is the smaller your sensor, or the larger your sensor, depending, your lens size has to change to get an equivalent field of view. So one of the advantages, some people think of it as an advantage, I'm one of those people, with Micro Four Thirds systems is it reduces size and weight because the lenses can be much smaller for an equivalent field of view. So this is my 12 to 35 millimeter lens, which is almost always attached to my Panasonic Lumix G9 or my G95 when I have that, when I get it back from repair. And that 12 to 35 millimeter is going to give you that same field of view, roughly, because we haven't gotten into aspect ratios yet, but basically that same field of view as 24 to 70 millimeters on a full frame camera. So it's actually twice the throw. On the Micro Four Thirds, that smaller sensor, I get smaller glass, and I get twice the range out of it. Okay, and I consider that an advantage. Now, some people are going to debate the field of view thing because you're dealing with different aspect ratios as well. The aspect ratio on Micro Four Thirds, for instance, is the 4:3 aspect ratio. It's relatively square. It's a little bit wider than square. And if you're old like me, you'll remember old TVs before flat panel televisions. And that's the aspect ratio those were in, or your old computer monitor. It's that aspect ratio. And if you don't know what aspect ratio is, you should know what aspect ratio is. But like 16:9 is generally your typical movie aspect ratio, or most TVs are in 16:9, that wide thing. And the the aspect ratio of full frame and APS-C is 3:2. So I also consider that, but I want to backtrack just for a second. Micro Four Thirds, these nomenclatures get really confusing as well. So, though Micro Four Thirds does also happen to be 4:3 aspect ratio, that has nothing to do with why it's called Micro Four Thirds. Those fours and those threes have nothing to do with those fours and those threes. The nomenclature's from some bizarre measurement dating back to the old 4/3 film system, which had something to do with like the distance between a cathode ray firing and then the viewable surface area. It's nothing you need to carry around in your head, any of these nomenclatures for what these systems are named for you to function with them. It's fun to know. If you're a technician, if you're an engineer, it might be something to delve into, but full frame, APS-C, Micro Four Thirds, the naming of themselves, other than which system it pertains to, you don't need to get into all of that territory, because honestly, it doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense when you're got into it. It's not practical knowledge you can use. But by coincidence, Micro Four Thirds is 4:3 aspect ratio. But back to that aspect ratio. I consider that an advantage as well on the Micro Four Thirds system, because at 4:3, both my vertical and my horizontal shots, they're a lot more modular, if you will, with different social media platforms, depending on which orientation I wish to post in. And by my eye, it's easier to compose in with I don't have to worry about all this different background space and negative space and things like that. I can fill the frame effectively and leave space if I want to as well. Now, the argument against that is, well, I could shoot in 3:2 and crop down, and that's absolutely true. But when you're operating and through that eyepiece and whatnot, it's sort of, you kind of want to compose with what you natively have. And if I'm stuck with composing with what I natively have in front of me, I like that 4:3 much better. And I'm not considering I'm shooting in one aspect ratio, then with the consideration, I'm definitely going to be cropping down to this one. And so I like the 4:3 for myself. Now, the other thing that comes down with sensor size, and this is what makes a big difference, on paper and often in practice, though there's a lot of debate about this, and you will find fights and arguments online and other videos, people trashing this system and trashing this system. This one's better and this one's better. You don't need to take a side. But one of the things that's debatably true is as you increase that sensor size, you're also increasing dynamic range in your photos. And I am mainly photography. I'm not a videographer, as you can tell, at all. Like, video is a second thought to me, though I do deal with some of it here and there. It's a bonus feature for me that I'm still fascinated by. Like the fact that I can go on the internet on my telephone. It's still fascinating to me because I'm old. But I digress. But there is a greater dynamic range. It's generally accepted the larger sensor size you go. And what that means is the difference between your very dark color, very dark and very light, and the range of gradation between colors is going to be greater and larger. So you're going to get this fuller representation of the shot you take with that larger sensor. Again, it's debatable. There's a lot of tests saying that's not necessarily true, and it depends a lot on conditions, and it depends a lot on your subject matter. Depends a lot on the lens you use. But I would say, yes, there is some truth to that. So if you absolutely need the highest quality and the highest definition and greatest dynamic range possible, you might want to go with that full frame system. However, for Micro Four Thirds, as long as your shot's, it's a good shot. Like the image quality is generally good. It was in focus. You had the basics covered. You can print up to 11 by 14, no worries. And you can go larger again, depending on the shot, depending on that subject matter, depending if it was very low light, depending if it was very dark. Hello, Charlie. So in real world terms, if you know you're constantly taking photographs for billboards or something, or very large print or advertising, or you're going to be selling, I don't know, sofa-sized photographic prints or something, you're probably going to go with full frame if you're not going to be doing that on a regular basis. From that concern standpoint, I think you're okay with MFT. And again, that MFT advantage, Micro Four Thirds, is we're getting smaller lenses, so a little bit less weight, a little bit more compact. It's a bit more portable. I like that 4:3 aspect ratio quite a bit. Now, the camera bodies can be a lot smaller, but as other camera systems have become mirrorless, mirrorless meaning it doesn't have the little prism that flips like the old DSLRs did, single lens reflex systems. They've gotten rid of that. They've gotten rid of the mirrors. So the full frame bodies have been able to get a lot smaller, and to put more tactile control and stabilization features in Micro Four Thirds, the bodies have gotten bigger. So the gap between the bodies themselves, as far as more recent cameras are concerned, has closed quite a bit. So with body size, the camera body, the camera without the lens attached, the difference is getting smaller and smaller. But there's still a huge stock of Micro Four Thirds cameras that are older, if you want something small and portable, that if you want to go way back, aren't much bigger than my old point and shoots like this Nikon here. And they can fit, yes, something roughly this size that has the same sensor, well, same sensor size, not in megapixels, but the actual physical dimensions of the sensor as this camera here, are available. You can find things like that. So you can get a very, very compact system if you want with Micro Four Thirds. Or you can cover all those angles, have the very, very compact walk-around system and your big gun camera, and they can all take the same lenses and they can all operate on the same system. So that's another advantage I have. And Micro Four Thirds has probably the widest variety of lenses available for that system out of any other, because all the others are definitely segmented by brand per brand. Nikon has their mount, and Fuji with APS-C has their mount, and Sony has their mounts, and you can get adapters and things, but anytime you're dealing with adapters, things can go a little haywire, or some of the features might work. And that's true with MFT also. The two main manufacturers of Micro Four Thirds, or the manufacturers of Micro Four Thirds, are Olympus, or now OM Systems, and Panasonic with their Lumix systems. Now, while those lenses, as far as the mount's concerned, are perfectly interchangeable between Panasonic and Lumix, and that's a real advantage, certain features might not work the same when you use an Olympus lens on a Panasonic body, or a Panasonic lens on an Olympus body. So those are some concerns to have there too. So there is that dynamic range advantage with going full frame. I haven't experienced that disadvantage for myself. And in fact, I do one of the things that Micro Four Thirds is often bashed for, which is, oh, it's no good in low light. You can't take low light photography. You can't take Most of my shooting is done in nightclubs and dance nights and things like that, or at least I'd say a good half of it is done in very dark scenarios with flash photographer. But it's true, if you're not using the flash, and in general, you are going to get more noise as you increase the sensitivity of that little sensor, of that little piece of film. And that's one of the settings you're going to be dealing with all the time, is the ISO setting. How sensitive do I want that piece of film to react? And it's sort of equivalent to the old speed for film. Like, what speed is this film? Is it high speed film? Is it slow speed film? That's sort of what the ISO is. And Micro Four Thirds is going to be noisier. No, guaranteed, it's going to be noisier. I'm going to give you that. And that noise is how much grain from the pixels and how much detail you lose from the sensor trying to generate an image, so to speak. And you're going to get more of that with Micro Four Thirds as you pump up to higher ISO, as you pump up to higher sensitivity to make up for being in a low light situation. So that is true, but there's lots of ways around it, and I haven't run into it as an impasse. There's not like a great miraculous shot I've missed because of that, or that I had to toss because of that. So your mileage may vary. So there's a lot to consider, but the general concept is Micro Four Thirds can be smaller and lighter. It can be smaller and lighter. It can be significantly smaller and lighter. It can also be, as far as the body, about the same size. If you like that 4:3 aspect ratio, which I think is very handy and works for so many scenarios, and you can switch from portrait to landscape like all the time without worrying about your composition as much. Or rather, it's easier to compose within it. I think that's an advantage. The other major advantage of it is, as with, we are doubling our field of view, as we talked about that lens before. We are also doubling our depth of field. Now, depth of field is how in focus or out of focus, how isolated is the subject? Is the subject very clear and everything is blurry and bubbly in the background? That super blurry, bubbly, the bokeh, B-O-K-E-H, that's pretty much a full frame deal, sometimes an APS-C deal, to get that extremeness of it. Personally, I don't like that trend at all. I want a little bit of background saturation, but the big blurry bokeh, I'm not a fan of it. I want almost everything to be in focus in my shot with just enough separation. And with Micro Four Thirds, all settings being equivalent ISO, equivalent f-stop, equivalent shutter speed, all that stuff, with a relatively equivalent answerable lens, blah, blah, blah. All settings, all lens equivalent, are as equivalent as they can be. On MFT, you actually get twice the depth of field. So you don't get that bokeh. You get more in focus, you get that nice, tighter, cleaner image to me. Now, some people want that. They want that super blurry thing. It's filters on all your phones to add it synthetically, and not do it organically through the glass and through the camera. And it's a hot trend that's getting quite abused, that a lot of people love, that severe, extreme background separation. And yeah, if that's something you absolutely want and that's what you love and something you want to achieve, you probably want to go full frame. If you don't want that, say you're a nature photographer or something, or you're doing, I highly go with Micro Four Thirds system, because we get twice the depth of field at the same aperture. Twice the depth of field at the same aperture. That's pretty amazing. That's just the physics of the way the sensor and the glass are to each other. And I think that's advantage. So with all those little advantages, for me, they add up to a better fit than what full frame offers, which is going to be heavier, much narrower depth of field at the same aperture, at the aspect ratio that I don't really want to operate in. Those are some disadvantages to me. Cost gaps, the gap in price as far as new systems are concerned is also closing, so I really wouldn't consider that much, but depends what you need out of it. So I think I've covered most of the basic bases of the whole thing, but please feel free to ask questions if I babbled on. This is my second video on this channel, other than a dress up. It's my second, actually it's my first camera video, my first photography video, so, you know, let me know if I'm babbling on too much. But that's my talking head introduction to the Micro Four Thirds system. I hope it's helpful to you. I hope it didn't confuse you more so, but do what you will with it. Have a great day.